Welcome if you're just joining us. We're just giving a few minutes for everybody to get signed on and then we'll get started. Okay, I've got 4:06 on my clock, so I think we'll jump in, and if more people join in, they'll catch up with us along the way. So welcome everyone. This is the Build Back Better Together Arts and Culture Focus Team meeting, October 15th. And thank you everyone for shifting with us as we moved our schedule around over the last couple of weeks. As you know, we changed the order of our topics around a little bit. So today's topic is adapting and making change, responding to racial justice and COVID-19. So thank you for being here with us and taking your time. We look forward to our conversation today. I'm just going to read really quickly the description for our meeting today. You've probably already seen it, but just to get us going. So what we want to talk about today is the ways in which arts and culture are created and presented must change in response to public health and safety requirements and in order to overcome past and current racial and social inequities. This month, today, we will explore how performers, companies, museums, and artists present work during and after COVID-19 and how our future cultural landscape can better represent and involve our entire community. Just like in our last meeting, we have a facilitator today, Erin Rosenblum, and some amazing conversation leaders that are going to be starting us off today, and then we'll do the small breakout groups like we did in the last meeting. So we'll go into that again in a minute. I just wanted to give some brief introductory comments. As everyone knows, we're talking about equity, we're talking about resiliency. We're really in an unprecedented moment right now, and we're experiencing a culture shift, and that involves extreme hardship, but also infinite possibility, and that's what we're optimistic about. Artists and culture organizations have never been more important than they are now to expose truths, to help us see into our future. While we look to the arts and culture to comfort us at this time, we're also looking to them for a call for action. And we know that all of you are doing that, and we thank you for that. Let's see, so I wanted to touch on our schedule for the remainder of our initiative. Quickly, we have another meeting on October 29th where our topic is equity in all arts and culture policies. And we're gonna have another one on November 12th to talk about public and private investment. And our initiative will start to wrap up toward the end of the year. We'll start to have a draft of an action plan and a toolkit. And so we'll be sharing that with everyone on our focus team and asking for your continued input on those drafts. We're here on Zoom. We are a group, so we will just remind everybody to keep your microphone on mute if you're not in your breakout group or you're not speaking, just so we can have the best sound possible. And remember to use the chat function that's along the bottom of the toolbar, along the bottom of your screen. It says chat. It looks like a little speech bubble. Feel free to use that to provide input, to pose questions. We do record the meeting, and we keep all of that chat text so that it helps us document the meeting and go back to it in the future. So please use that often and anytime you would like. And also, as you go into your breakout groups, please remember to keep notes in the chat when you come back into the main group. So that's pretty much our Zoom reminders. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, our facilitator for today, my B3T partner, and he's going to go facilitate today's meeting and introduce the rest of our speakers. Take it away, Aaron.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm Aaron Rosenblum. I'm a regional program coordinator at the Louisville Free Public Library. I'm also a sound artist and musician, so I have buy-in here from a number of angles. What I want to do before we start up is give you an overview of kind of what we're hoping to accomplish with some of these conversations a little bit, talk about our panelists, and then we'll kind of once again talk about the order of operations for how we have these conversations. We have, with this process, we've been kind of open to looking at systems level change in a pretty broad way, and in ways that institutions can change or that we might call on them to change, and the way that individuals might operate differently as artists or arts consumers, or in other parts of our cultural space. We don't just want to look for Band-Aids or just kind of small. We do want to look for small things people can do that will make a meaningful difference, but we really hope that this will be a space that people can talk about the bigger changes that are needed, things that have taken too long or are taking too long, that really need to start happening in our arts and culture community. So as such, we're having these series of conversations on these different topics. And I want to add just a little bit more about today's. I think we originally had the word programming in our title for this month, but it kind of went away because we do want to think about programming that institutions do, but we also want to think about the equivalent for individuals. So if you're a teaching artist, that might still be classes and programming, but for individual artists, how we're showing during COVID-19, how we're showing and how our practices might be changing in response to the racial justice movement. So today's subject is really about kind of how we are reaching our communities and engaging them with the arts in this time. So other conversations have been, what are the roadblocks for our whole sector? Later this month, we'll talk about policy in organizations and what ways we really need to set structures for ourselves to meet equity or health and safety goals. But this one will be about how we're doing that engagement in this time, if we are, and what's keeping us from it if we're not, again, in relation to COVID and in relation to racial justice and equity. What we'll do in each round of this, Sarah has mentioned the breakout groups and our panels. And if you haven't been with us for a previous one of these meetings, what we'll do is we're going to do 2 discussion rounds, and in each round, I will ask a question of our panelists. They'll each get a chance to answer. Depending on how we do on time, there might be a little bit of follow-up on those questions. And then we'll go into breakout groups on that same question. So we will be more or less randomly at Sarah's direction, split into small groups of 3 or 4. And in those groups, you're expected to kind of self-motivate, just introduce yourself and continue the conversation on that question that we've been discussing with the panelists. Then we'll come back from that breakout group. The breakout groups are about 10 minutes. We'll come back, spend about 5 minutes discussing what else came up from those smaller group conversations. And we usually ask 1 or 2 of the small groups to kind of report out on video, if somebody to speak about what happened in the group, and the rest of the groups we ask to put important findings in the chat so we can use that information later. So we'll do that process twice with 2 different questions, and then we'll kind of close up after that and then do final thoughts and remind you of all of our future plans. And we have a new survey this month if you've seen our past surveys. With that, I'll introduce our panelists. I'm still only seeing two of them, but I think we will just, we'll start the conversation that way. And if our third panelist arrives, that will be great. It gives me as a facilitator a little bit of extra space to ask follow-up questions, which I like. So our two panelists that I see, and if the third is here, hopefully you will speak up, are Amy Attaway, who is the Associate Artistic Director at Kentucky Shakespeare, and who we have invited to talk as representative of an institution that is used to working in unusual spaces, working outdoors, working with the environment, but also working all around the city in their trips around to the parks, educational programs, et cetera. So we really look forward to hearing about how that has changed, how that could change, and what might be possible. And we also are joined by Toya Northington, who is Community Outreach Manager at the Speed Art Museum and is also independently an artist. And we are excited to have Toya speak, hopefully to both of those aspects. On the institutional level, how the Speed is operating, not as used to being outdoors, and also as an individual artist about what it's like to try to work, what it's like to try to show, and just kind of do what an artist would be doing under these current circumstances. Our third panelist is Robert Barry Fleming, Executive Artistic Director at Actors Theatre, but so far I don't see him. Hopefully he'll show up, and I'll keep an eye on my messages to see if he's had any problem getting into the Zoom. And of course, Actors Theatre is, you know, a cornerstone cultural institution in Louisville, and one of our premier producers of really incredible content for the community. So we are hoping, if he's able to make it, to hear about how going forward they're going to face these challenges and continue to do that and improve that along lines of health and safety and equity. So with that, I will say that we should start our first discussion round. So again, we'll have about 15 minutes of conversation, a 10-minute breakout group, and 5 minutes of coming back together to go back over what we've learned. Our first question is, oh, and I should say, if you have questions about what's going on at any time, you could put a question in the chat, and Sarah or I will see it and try to address it. Certainly, if you're experiencing technical problems that you think are on the Zoom side, please let us know. Or if I haven't been unmuted this whole time, and you all have just been very polite about not telling me that. So our question for round one is, how do we as artists and organizations address racial inequity in our programming and our work at a time when COVID-19 and funding challenges have made it harder to perform our most basic public functions? And again, to expand a little on that, that's at the institutional level, that's at the individual level as an artist. Our confrontation with racial inequity, or racial inequity, certainly as it previously existed before March or May of this year, and the pandemic, and our adaptation to that, to just do what we do. So Amy or Toya, I think whoever unmutes first, if you want to give us, oh, Amy is pointing in the direction on my screen of Toya. So Toya, if you wouldn't mind taking on that question first, and I'm going to drop it in the chat for everybody to look at as you get started.
No pressure, Toya. I'm excited to hear from you.
Thank you. It's so funny. I sat with that question for a minute, and it kind of raked at my spirit a bit. Because a lot of times when I hear that, it's perceived as if there's a choice, like there's an option. You know, we're struggling with funding, and we're struggling with really making our budgets, and we've got so much programming we have to do, and all these limitations. And for me, with my work, and I also have a nonprofit myself, where we are today, and Sarah really led into that, is the world has changed. So I think last year, the year before last, we could have approached it in that way as, well, how do we do that if we approach equity? Or how do we do that if we incorporate social justice? Or, you know, if we want to do something as if it's the other, as if it's the optional other, but the world changed. And so I tell people a lot that after COVID, that was our first round of change. And then locally with the Breonna Taylor injustice that happened, it really shifted people from the core. And so a lot of people, especially Black and brown people who have been able to kind of adjust and really live through the kind of pain and trauma of being othered, of being violated, of being left out, it was okay for a while. You know, you can kind of function and you can go through life. But after that happened, that Band-Aid was ripped off, and that anesthesia that we had, that kind of feeling that we were all community and that we were all going to be safe somehow, that's gone. And so the things that were acceptable before are no longer acceptable. And so institutions really need to know that this is the new norm. And so we should treat it like we do everything that's essential. So it's like, are you going to have a program? Are you going to have an organization? Or are you going to shift to what really the community needs? And as art institutions, that's really what we have to do. And I'll give you an example. I don't think anyone in our generation thought that Blockbuster was going to go out of business, right? These are institutions. And as much as I've been raised in the arts as an institution, I know that we are not infallible, right? We might have some endowments, there's some money in the bank, but if we don't shift, if we don't meet the needs of our community, if we cannot stay relevant, we will not stay alive. So right now, I feel like this is our time. This is our time to really show why we're here, why we need to reflect community, why we need to support our neighbors, and why that needs to really come through in programming.
Thank you for that. Amy, if you'd like to go ahead, and then I'm scribbling things down, so I'll have a couple questions or at least one question for each of you after you've gone ahead.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Toya. That was great. I'm so happy to hear that. So for us at Kentucky Shakespeare, when COVID hit, you know, we are outdoors and we did have that going for us, but we spent a long time trying to hang on to our summer season, and then finally accepted the reality that it just wasn't going to happen. So we, you know, pulled our tour off the road, pulled our educators off the road, and ended up postponing our summer season until next year. And then when the racial justice movement happened as well, the newly reinvigorated movement, for us as a we're a very small staff, a pretty small organization, and all 5 of our full-time staff people are white. So we had each of us personally reckon with what that meant, and as an organization reckon with what that meant. And this goes along really nicely with what you just said, Toya, because we have been doing the work as we saw it up until now. You know, we make a real effort to put Black and brown people on our stages and hire Black and brown people to be teachers for us. And we've done that consistently and have a real ongoing effort to get Black and brown people on our board of directors. And that's a thing that's been humming along for a long time and for us. But this summer, each of us individually and us as an organization had to reckon with the fact that that's not enough. And also, for me personally, as an artist and as a part of this organization, one of the biggest things for me to reckon with was sort of like the assumption that we were already doing it. You know, the assumption that we already get it, that we're already, like, we're artists, so we love everyone, we respect everyone, right? So what other work is there to do? And as this summer progressed and I started listening more and hearing more and understanding more from not only from the artists within our organization, but also from other artists in the community, other people in the community, and just other people in my life, I've realized that that's not enough. There's so much more work to do. I feel really lucky that I'm part of an organization where we all are on that track together. I don't feel like there's been any resistance from my boss, who's right down there, or our board of directors. We've all been ready to do this work, so that's been gratifying for me personally, and I think for all of us. One of the first things that we all did was individually have conversations with the Black artists that were in our world. So we each individually talked with people who we've employed, people who are in our like extended family, and asked what they needed. What do you need? Anything? Can we do anything for you? And so what we heard and what we ended up being able to do was amplify their voices. Especially in the thick of all this, we knew that we didn't need a lot more white people talking about anything. So we asked our Black artists if they wanted that amplification, and many of them did. And so we were able to, to put that up on our social media and do whatever we could within the confines of the pandemic. One of the other things that the pandemic sort of did for us is that we were all working from home, and we all had some time sort of to do some extra reading and research. So all of us read White Fragility, and we all, had more time to listen to our peers of color speak. So for all of us as an organization, we've been able to take this moment to learn and to listen, and to realize what we can do from our position. So there are some things that we've done, some things that we're starting to do that are building up to getting larger and larger, which I can talk more about. But I think that's the general point that I wanted to make, is that what we see as an organization as what we have to offer is our space, our willingness to listen and grow.
Thank you, Amy. So out of both of those great responses and reflections on what you've been doing or how things have been, I guess the question that I think I would ask to both of you as a follow-up before we go into a breakout is, if you can say yet, what changes will that mean for your programming? Again, to either of you as artists or for your institutions, are there changes that you have seen or that you have wanted to make but couldn't until now because of the circumstances, or that you have realized just need to be true? And there's so many aspects. I can imagine that taking Kentucky Shakespeare happens to be fairly economically accessible given the model. But other institutions, deal with how they're going to go about, making sure their art is accessible. But really, any aspect of literal programming, of on-site programs and things like that, or just the general operations of visits to sites or to performances. To either of you or both of you.
I'll go. I'll speak to that. I didn't explain kind of how I fit into the Speed Art Museum. And so I'm the community outreach manager, and my background is in social work. So I came in as an artist and a social worker just to make change. Never had any aspiration for working for a museum. Wasn't ever a goal for me. I was always an independent artist, an activist, a feminist. And so my interest isn't in the institution as far as it was as I was entering into it, my interest was in coming in to make it equitable. I came in to make voice, or to make a place and a platform for others that didn't have a voice. And it not just at the speed, my institution, but just the art world in general has not been equitable. It's not how we're taught. It's not how it's been facilitated. It just has been a non-issue for a long time. And so I started, it's been about 1.5 years with that intention of all of my programs were going to align with saying who is at this table, who is missing, and then how do I make space for them and give them a voice. So that's been day one. And the main thing I've said throughout my time there is that you can make my life easier if it's integrated into everything. So that was a day one goal for me, that everything that we do, every program that we have, our initiatives, our mission, not just how it looks on paper, but how it's carried out in practice. All of that has to align with that idea of bringing everyone, right? Everybody celebrating art forever. And so with community outreach, I'm over pretty much things out facing to bring in communities that are not engaged, specifically art making arms, which is community connections. We have a free membership program called Speed for All. I'm developing an ambassadors program. So all those things were already in the works. But when this new wave of the social justice movement came in, it was almost like a fuel, right? So I had been, building up for a while, but now I had a whole nation behind me. And so in some ways it was helpful because, and I know we have a question coming up about criticism, it was like free feedback. I didn't have to go to the community and say, what are you all thinking? How do you feel about this? Well, it was everywhere. We had surveys, artists were online. I had community members as part of the programs telling me what they needed, what they wanted, and it's helpful. And I say that because there was an adaptation as far as how we do the programming, not so much who we do it for. So really saying, okay, if I have a program, I have one called Aroha, which is for my 55 and greater community. And what I learned is that people were looking for connection, right? People were hurting, people were depressed, people didn't have an avenue to really get out what they were experiencing. So the adaptation was, no, we won't be online. We met in person, right? Speed is pretty big. We can social distance. When we had our exhibition last week, and it's beautiful, you'll have to see it. I see Miss Lucille, she's one of the shining art stars in the program. And we met outside, and we met and we had lunch, and it's just a real need to not forget that right now, that we're fighting for these causes, yes. And we need to keep each other safe, yes. But the arts is one of the things that really bring us together. And so when things are dark and grim, when you can find that light, we can cry together, we can hold hands together, but at the same time, we can lift each other up. So that was important. And there's another piece of your follow-up question that I missed. You say it again?
I would have to remember what I said, first of all, which would require going to the recording. But I have noticed that we have been joined by our third panelist. So Amy, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to step aside, pose our first question to Robert Barry Fleming, Executive Artistic Director at Actors Theatre, and then we'll go into our first breakout room experience. So welcome, Robert. I'm going to quickly restate our first round question here, and we'd love to have your thoughts on it, and then we'll do our first breakout. So the question is, how do we as artists and organizations address racial inequity in our programming and our work at a time when COVID-19 and funding challenges have made it harder to perform our most basic public functions?
That's an extraordinarily good question. Obviously, we've pivoted to working on a digital platform in order to continue storytelling, as we're not doing live event gathering at this time. So any kind of opportunity to address any civic or any artistic or cultural concerns are exclusively on those kind of new media and old media platforms, but not in a live event gathering setting. And I would say, you know, what we have done since the pandemic kind of really stopped Humana in its tracks, our Humana Festival of New American Plays. We moved very quickly to taping a number of the shows so that we, in conjunction with our unions and agreements with the artists, were able to share that work and continue that conversation. That's been amplified over the past 6 to 7 months in a way that has continued to move us into storytelling, but we have utilized not only taping of a live show, which at this juncture is very, very challenging to do, into doing some capture and quarantine with artists, doing work on solely an audio kind of platform. And that includes radio plays, include podcast, sharing work on Facebook Live, and sharing work in panel discussions with city leaders and others who are in that civic conversation, and continuing to watch that story unfold. And we've been able to be pretty responsive to the moment by having a weekly series and those kinds of conversations that I think, while they're wide-ranging, they're also opportunities for us to hone in on some of the immediate concerns around the nature of how the Breonna Taylor case came to our attention, how the grand jury decision has played out, and how that conversation continues with the protests in the face of the second health crisis of COVID-19. It is inherently isolating right now by the nature that we simply can't gather and be in proximity to each other. And I think it certainly amplifies the challenge of separateness and lifts up the deep seated subordination of certain citizens in our ecosystem and across this country. But I think as much as we can, continuing to have those conversations on whatever platforms we have access to is a beginning to untether our legacy to those inequities. I don't think there's any way, and I've not seen historically any way around challenges that are that deep-seated and rooted in the DNA of communities and systems be navigated by going around and trying to or skate the surface. I think it's going to be a pretty incremental and painful in some ways, but also maybe affirming way to be able to dig into all the complexities, the multi-dimensional complexities of how we've gotten where we've gotten. And we know that that is the construction of race is one piece of that, the construction of race simultaneous with the construction of capitalism and how those two are intertwined is another part of that. And it goes on from there. But I think it's one of those situations that just requires an ongoing nibbling at the elephant. What's the saying? How do you eat an elephant? Like one bite at a time. It is big, it's deep, and there's a lot of space for compartmentalization and disassociation that makes it difficult to have difficult conversations. And I think part of that is also a part of following a legacy of spaces that are conflict adverse makes it even more difficult to continue to have that conversation, because sometimes we're conflating collaboration and working collectively together to solve something with simply agreeing. That's not necessarily a space of generative conflict, a conflict that can lead to real depthful navigation of the difficulties we face. So how's that for an opening?
That's great. Thank you, Robert, and Toya and Amy. So here in a moment, Sarah, I think will send us into the breakout groups. It won't be such a large number of groups this time. As a reminder, just introduce yourselves and discuss. There's no leader in the breakout groups. We're just here to discuss these ideas. If someone in your group wants to drop some main takeaways towards the end of the 10 minutes we spend in the groups in the chat, that's really helpful for us to see what everyone was talking about. And then we'll kind of draw on a couple of those to pipe in on the Zoom when we come back into the main room here.
Give me just 1 second here and we'll go to the breakout. 1 minute.
Sure. And as always, questions, you could also just put questions in the chat for me and Sarah about what's going on here or something not working or anything like that. And again, that first question that we'll be discussing when we get this pop up here in a moment is already in the chat. It says question 1. It's the only one in there.
Okay, so your breakout room will be 3 or 4 people. Okay, so hold on just 1 second and it'll start to switch you over.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, if you're still in the main meeting room, you should get an invitation to join a breakout session that you can click on and it'll put you into the breakout room.
Conversations must be going well. It's taking a minute for people to come back in.
They're gonna close them out in 20 seconds.
Oh, okay. We still had time.
It gives you a minute to come back.
Sarah, did you have an idea of of two groups that could talk. Do you want to pick numbers?
Let's see.
I tell you, if you need a volunteer, I'll volunteer.
Great.
That's great. That's one.
All right.
I'll have to say this again when everyone else is back, but we'll talk to two groups. And now, well, I think that's as many folks as we had before, so I think everyone's back from the groups. So Jim had volunteered to represent whatever group that was. Sarah might know the group number.
Yes, let me check.
Sure, and then we'll pick another
Were we
group.
group 3? I think we were group
Yeah.
3.
Room
Okay,
3.
yeah, so room 3, and we'll have one other room, which will be room.
Let's see. How about room 6?
Okay, so if while Jim is talking to us about what room 3 talked about, someone who was in room 6 can nominate themselves to comment. And otherwise, if you're in other groups, if you don't mind dropping some of what you talked about in the chat, that will be very useful for us. But meanwhile, Jim Welch and room 3.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Let's see. For those who don't know me, I'm Jim Welch, retired executive from Brown Forman, been very involved in the arts community, been past president of the Louisville Orchestra and currently vice president on the ballet board. So involved in those two groups and generally supportive and a philanthropist. Anyway, I had a wonderful breakout with Toya and Gretchen. And Toya was making what I thought was the excellent point, and she kind of said about this in her remarks, that it's probably premature for us to be asking ourselves how we as arts groups are going to address these issues of social injustice and racial injustice. And, you know, how are we gonna, I think I was combining sort of what Robert said, you know, how are we gonna bring people together and heal them and uplift our community in a time we're in isolation? It presupposes that we actually understand where we are. And it reminded me, one of the things I did at Brown Forman was I was in charge of our global strategic planning. And as you all know, probably having been involved in the strategic planning, and particularly if you've done the Michael Kaiser DeVos thing, you know, one of the things you start out, you know, after you figured out what your vision and mission are, the next thing you do is assess the situation you're in. You assess both externally the world and environment you're in, and then internally what are your strengths and weaknesses before you figure out what or how you're going to do your art. And we're leaping into the how are we going to do it when we probably don't completely understand the environment we're in now. And what have we learned? I know Amy, I think, said, hey, we're spending a lot of, you know, because Shakespeare can't perform, so we're spending a lot of time doing self-reflection and reading and trying to understand. And I think maybe that's one of the key takeaways. All these arts groups need to, instead of just sort of leaning out and, well, let's try this and let's do this and let's see if that works. Maybe this is more a time for a deeper reflection and a deeper understanding, to understand what has happened in our world, in our community, so that we can have a more meaningful impact in our art. And so we're, so maybe perhaps the question's a little premature, so I guess was the bottom line. And Toya and Gretchen, if you want to chime in on any refinement of that, I tried to capture the spirit of what we were saying.
No, that was great. I knew you was going to do it. I knew you was going to capture it.
Great. Gretchen, did you have anything to add or no?
No, I think Jim did a really good job of summing it up, and I appreciate Toya for, you know, I think we're all grappling, like, you know, we all want to be problem solving and coming with solutions and coming with answers. And sometimes, you know, I think this is a moment where there aren't answers right now, because we don't really know where we're at. And I think that I appreciate her bringing kind of that to the forefront, that this isn't like anything we've ever done before. So let's try and understand what it is first before, you know, plowing forward with, oh, we're, you know. And I really appreciate her reference too with the blockbuster. You know, these kind of things happen that you don't think are possible, but they happen. And this maybe is time more for reflection.
Great. And did room six know who was in it and who is representing them? We'd love to hear from you briefly, and then we'll get into our second question. And it's my fault, we're probably a little behind, so we'll get right into that after we hear from room 6.
Room
Well,
6 is, go
I
ahead.
can jump in. This is Lisa. Matt and Lamont were there. So I'm not in the art community, so I'm coming as sort of a supporter of and really interested in the topic. So I'll just give you my interpretation of some of the issues, and please, you guys, chime in. I think just really quickly, Lamont, and I'm not going to get the right title. You run the 101 Museum. Is that correct? I didn't catch the title. But what he said was
Roots 101. Yeah.
Route 101. Sorry, that's right. Okay.
Roots. Yeah.
Yep. That he has a message and that is really needed now. And Louisville really needs that message in order to enhance our understanding of what's going on, particularly with the racial issues. And it was interesting when he talked about some of the barriers, particularly for nonprofits, is really getting the funding and the apprehension for like corporations or larger organizations to fund because they don't know who you are. So that is really a huge challenge. Here's one reaction I had. You know, right after all of the racial demonstrations, the racial inequity and the demonstrations began, one of the things you noticed was all these organizations were quickly jumping on the bandwagon to say, hey, we're going to change this and we're going to do that. We're going to do this. It's like, well, okay, there's the knee-jerk reaction, but the problem is you really need long-term sustained partnership from some of these larger corporations to help nonprofits. And I really resonated with Lamont's message about he really has part of the message that people need to understand. So how do we build long-term partnerships and have corporations really put their money where their mouth is and help support organizations like his and others to bring out that Black message. Hopefully I captured that right. Guys, jump in if I misrepresented something. That was pretty much our conversation.
Great. If the others in the room don't have any sort of corrections to make, I would love to move us on. So I will. So we have a second question. And I think we'll go around just kind of once with the panel and then do our breakout. So you all can think about which of you wants to make one of the other of you answer first. The question, our second question is, how can we as artists and organizations respond to community feedback and especially community criticism around our response to these crises? And again, that's both to racial justice and a response or not enough response or too much response. And also COVID-19, people saying you should be doing your programming, people saying you shouldn't be doing your programming. So how can we respond to that community criticism? And again, Amy and Toya and Robert, you could draw straws if we were in a place with straws.
I'm happy to jump in. I think what we're talking about is really active listening. And again, that can be a difficult competency to master when there hasn't been a lot of listening, when there's been a lot of prescribing. I think, what's interesting is I'm just coming from teaching a class at U of L, and I'm thinking of some of the things that we're talking about in that context and how universal some conversations are. And that which we don't know, we just don't know. And sometimes we don't know that we don't know. What we're really looking for is a path or a process that would allow us to increase our knowing and our effectiveness in responding. I think that's difficult if you feel your charge is to lead, and that has been where for many, many, many periods, systems and institutions and the leadership within them understand that as their role. It's really, really difficult to be receiving. So I think the big task is a simple one and incredibly difficult one of what does active listening really look like in this time and place.
Great, thank you, Robert.
I won't make you go again, Toya. One of the best things that I've learned through this process of my own listening and self-reflection was from Marian Vassar from U of L. She said, when asked a similar question, how do you respond when people are critical? She said, say thank you and accept that the person who's giving you that feedback has gone through some kind of emotional labor to give it to you. So that really, really resonated with me when she said that, and I keep going back to it. I'm thinking about it a lot. And luckily, we haven't, as Kentucky Shakespeare, gotten a ton of negative feedback about our racial justice response or our COVID response. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback for our COVID response, although people were sad that we canceled the summer season. Mostly we got a lot of great feedback from our extended family, our audiences and patrons about what we did instead, putting our stuff online and repackaging and making the online 60th anniversary celebration video. So we've had some great feedback from that. The moves that we've been able to do, the moves that we have made in the racial justice movement have been positively received as well. Hiring 3 out of 4 of our teachers this year, people of color, and working on racial justice statement with our board. We've mostly gotten pretty positive feedback. And I think this is a supposition, but I imagine that the reason for that is because we've been pretty transparent about everything we're doing and pretty out front, I think, about our own reflection and what we've got going on, and that we keep in pretty constant communication with our artists and with our patrons and extended family in that way.
Great. And Toya.
So I represent a highly criticized organization, not just what I do, but just being the largest. There's a spotlight on the Speed Art Museum that I welcome. For me, I see it similar to how I used to tell my customer service representatives when I used to train them. And my team would take the I write card callers, the ones that call and want to speak to the CEO, and I tell them that it's not personal. There's an issue that happened before they got to you. And so when they're upset, they're not talking about you directly. They really just want you to solve the problem. And so I say that in my work at the Speed all the time. It's really not about me or not about us, not about you. These issues didn't start with us. They're embedded into these institutions. They're embedded in these systems. Systems of oppression have been here for ages. The difference is we can be the ones to solve it. But the only way we can do that is if we're self-reflective, if we examine kind of our place in it. How did that get into what we're doing, and how do we extract it out? And so I welcome the criticism. And when I hear it, I say thank you. So I love that. Absolutely, thank you. Publish all you want criticism. Great. Now I know how you feel. Let me hear the people. Tell me directly. If I'm on a panel, I'll say, email me to the side and tell me what you're thinking. Because that's the only way we're going to move forward. We can't move forward if we're wanting to hear the good things. And I like the good things. People tell me good things, but it's the person that didn't say anything or the person who tells their family that really makes that impact. And so I really encourage us to really lean into it, to really accept it and say, okay, this is not about my great work. It doesn't mean that we're not doing great work. It could be great, but it still could be hurtful. It could be leaving someone behind. And so that's what we need to really focus on. What's that nugget that we could change to make things go better?
Thank you. I think those are all great perspectives on these different forms of feedback we can all expect if we haven't gotten them yet, or that we've all been getting. So we still have time for our second breakout group, and to come back and discuss that. And then we have a quick sort of next steps and closing from me and Sarah. So I'm really just running my mouth until Sarah is ready to send us away again. Oh, she's ready.
I'm ready. There's a couple groups changed. So you may be in the same group, you may be changed a bit.
Okay, great.
Okay, here we go. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hello. I'm sorry, I think your group had we had someone who had to step out, so your group was small this time.
Oh, yes, that's okay.
We had a great chat.
Yes, we did.
Good.
I'm going to have to go very soon, Sarah,
Okay.
just to let you
Yep.
know.
We're almost done.
Trying to
Welcome
figure
back.
out the rain situation for the show tonight.
Uh-oh. Good luck.
I don't like seeing this rain.
Yeah.
No,
Can't
there's
you
no
do
way.
something about that?
Yeah, it's good it's not a weekend. Yeah, Amy, I think we're not going to be able to get it dry enough, but we tarped the stage, but I'll
Welcome back.
contact you.
Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we have everybody. Does everybody, we'll use the buddy system. Does everybody see their buddies from their group? I know we have just a few minutes left until our ending for today, but Erin, I'm hoping you could grab a representative of group 4 and 2 and 5 maybe to report out.
4 and 2 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
I was in 2. Martha or Cheyenne, are you just going to stay muted, which means I have to talk? Or I'll do that briefly, and then we'll do 4 and 5. Were those the other ones?
Yep.
Okay. So I came in a little late. My internet dropped out, of course. But we talked a bit about blind spots and not just taking criticism, but continuing to kind of look for when you think you've considered something, but you've really only considered it from your own, how it impacts you, and just continuing to kind of widen that scope and look for people to tell you what else you're missing about the situation. We also talked about spaces like this one, continuing to be supportive of these conversations, where people can kind of receive support as they go through this in their organization or in their own practice, and about how organizations can be spaces for critical and awkward was the word Martha used, for awkward conversations. So museums, because you can use the lens of art, can have awkward conversations. Libraries can have a separate set of awkward conversations, and kind of looking for where we can, put these conversations into a place where institutionally they can happen and be productive for the community. I think that says enough for our group. Lee, I think I saw your hand up. Are you 4 or 5?
I was in group 5.
Okay. Rare that I get to call on you, so.
Sure, I'll be happy to report. So I was in group 5 with Amy and Destiny, and I think we reached a consensus that it's really important when you're hearing criticism that you listen and take that seriously, that you be honest and ask hard questions of yourself and your organization, and then try to be responsive to that. One thing that I would add is that I think it's probably important for a lot of our organizations right now to actually solicit feedback. I would love to hear from the community how they think the library can do a better job of positively responding to what's going on and making the library a better organization. And Amy, if you or Destiny have anything that you want to add to that, I think that's my brief summary.
No, you did an excellent summary. I got nothing.
And so room 4, if you were in room 4, we're looking for, it's Suzanne has waved at us. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to see everybody. I hadn't seen everybody in so long. So I'm Suzanne Wright. I'm from JCPS, and of course, many of you know we don't get criticism at all. So we're just good to go. So anyhow, I did want to share a little brief, which kind of goes to this question about criticism. And I was sharing with a group earlier. We just recently, I guess a couple weeks ago, had some serious backlash about a story that was read. Some of you might have seen it on the news. The story specifically was called "Something Happened in Our Town," story about injustice. And basically the synopsis of the story is a police shooting, basically, of a Black man. So parents were, to say the least, and this is understatement, they were irate at us, and we got calls to where, why would you all talk about this? Why is this something that you all feel that you all need to talk about? Well, our response to criticism per our leader is we're not backing away from it. This is a reality. This is where we are. We have to utilize the information that's out there and provide it in an environment where it is a teachable moment so kids would understand. And so to the question at hand, it is for us, we just cannot shy away from it. We have to, once again, be courageous and really, confront it head on. However, we also, and this is what I was sharing with the group, although we want to be able to navigate through these conversations and we want to be able to have the discourse in classrooms, we at central office have to also be mindful that our educators may not be ready. And that's where the fearful thing is, because these teachers, some are even, either whether they're fresh out of college or whether they have been teaching 500 years, I say that to be obviously funny, 500 years, and have antiquated practices, right? That they are then stuck in their beliefs or core beliefs or what have you. So it's difficult for them to pivot, right? In some of these instances where the conversation is heavy. So as on our end, although we want to encourage the conversation, we just have to be able to provide the tools and strategies necessary for educators to be able to do it, and tell, as opposed to them saying, no, I don't want to talk about it, right? No, we can't talk about that right now. But it's in how do we equip them, even if that means doing some team teaching, putting an experienced person in there teamed up with that, teacher who is fearful. But the bottom line is we have to get to a point where we are courageous. And one, piece that shows the level of courage was Kentucky or Louisville. JCPS is one of the few districts that adopted recently the, racial equity policy that many of you have heard about. But in saying that, our charge, or my mindset, has been, when I talk to people, it has to also be more than just compliance, right? We're doing this because it's policy. No, it has to be deeper than that, which again takes a lot of work on our part, which we just have to continue to keep fighting the good fight. So as far as criticism, I say bring it on, and we will, confront it head on.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. We have 2 minutes until our stated end time, and Sarah, I think we can cram in what we have to say. I'll say some of it. We've done 2 surveys so far, and we're going to continue doing them during this process. Our October survey is up now. I just put it in the chat, but we're going to send it to the whole email list for this focus team, so you don't need to rush to grab it from there. We'd love your feedback. We also like to hear from people who weren't at the meetings. So that's the survey, and we'll kind of keep collecting that data and putting it in our action plan. Sarah, do we have much to say about our action plan this month?
Not yet, just that we'll start sending some material that we'll be asking you to read and provide input on. So stay tuned for that. Mostly we just want to say thank you to everyone for being with us today, and we recognize that it takes some effort to take this much time out of your schedule and to share your thoughts and your experiences. And so we appreciate all of your time and your open minds and your open hearts in doing that. And we will hope to see you all again on October 29th for our next group discussion. And like Erin said, please consider filling out the survey and share it with anyone that you think would have some great input to put into that survey as well. They don't have to have been here today. They don't have to be on the focus team. They don't have to have any other affiliation. If they want to provide input, that's great. And that's all we have. Erin, you got it?
Yep, I was gonna thank everyone as well, but especially Toya and Robert and Amy for being our conversation leaders today. And that's all I have.
And I'll thank Erin for being our facilitator. Thank you very much.
Oh, and thank you for running the show. And October 29th, because we had to shorten our schedule, we're back in 2 weeks with our conversation on policy in our sector, and we hope to see you there.
Thanks, everyone. Be well. Good luck with Shakespeare tonight. Bye.
And I'm saving the chat, but you may be also.
Great. I'll stop the recording.
Oh, you know what? You should save the chat